Welcome to my ultimate Hwei guide. In this video, I'll be teaching you everything that you want to know about Hwei and all of the information that you don't even realize exists yet. My name is evandabank. I'm a multi-season Challenger Hwei player, peaking rank 46 on the North American server, as well as arguably being the best Hwei currently, according to the rankings, in the world. I have over 1 million mastery points on Hwei, and it's safe to say that if you want to know anything about Hwei, I'm your guy. So without further ado, let's get into the guide. For this first section, we're going to talk about Hwei's identity. What I mean by this is we're going to talk about when Hwei is strongest, when you should pick Hwei, and generally what you can expect out of him in a game of League of Legends. It's important that you note what you're trying to do before we go into the rest of the guide, so you have a foundation about how Hwei functions overall. Hwei is a combo mage. He is the only combo mage in League of Legends. You might hear many people describe Hwei as an artillery mage or a control mage, but that's not quite correct. Hwei excels when he can string together multiple spells in a row. To this effect, Hwei is not the strongest in any situation where he cannot hit multiple enemies with multiple spells at the same time, hence why he's a combo mage. If you think about a champion like Orianna is very effective by putting her ball inside of a choke and simply pressing ultimate. That's very awesome, but it doesn't require multiple spells. The same thing could be said with a champion like Zyra. She's very effective by just dropping her plants and poking the enemy. Now that's a poking champion. And Xerath is a pure artillery mage, striking people from far away. And while Hwei has aspects of all three of their kits, he's not the strongest in those scenarios. Where Hwei excels is by controlling chokes in space and then getting those large combos off. Hwei is generally played in the mid and bot lane, though his bot lane win rate is about 2% higher than his mid lane win rate. The reason for this is not exactly because Hwei is stronger in bot lane, but because when he's played in bot lane, he's usually played by one-tricks, whereas in the mid lane, people tend to play Hwei for fewer games and they have less champion mastery. With that said, Hwei generally likes to play against melee champions on the enemy team. As we said before, he's a combo mage. It's easy to string together multiple spells against melee champions, and it's a lot harder to do that against ranged champions. This also ties into when you should be drafting Hwei. You should be drafting Hwei in scenarios where the enemy team has a lot of melee champions. Ideally, 3 or 4 is when Hwei is most effective. But with that said, I play Hwei every single game. You can still find success with him outside of those scenarios, but it won't be when he's strongest. Now, obviously, Hwei is not like a champion such as Malphite, where under certain scenarios, Malphite is almost completely worthless. Hwei is never going to be completely worthless. It's just that he is like 20% stronger in games where the enemy has a lot of melee champions. Hwei also likes to play with melee champions on his team. If we think about what we're trying to do, we're trying to control chokes and get combos on the enemy. Melee champions usually have a lot of crowd control that we can follow up on, and they buy us space by being beefy frontline behind which we can stand to get our combos off. So, we like to play with melee champions on our team, and we like to play against melee champions. There is, however, one exception of a type of team comp that Hwei is not good against that is primarily melee, and these are teams that have incredibly strong engage that Hwei can't block. Think about combos like Jarvan or Nocturne Orianna. Now, most people don't know this, but Jarvan ult is actually uninterruptible. If you EQ Jarvan in the middle of his ult, you can't stop it. This is extremely problematic for Hwei. He can't stop their engage, and he can't use his zone control and combo potential to prevent the enemy from getting on top of him. He's not threatening to them. A Nocturne Orianna combo can easily one-shot you, and so keep in mind those are the team comps under which Hwei is least effective. Whereas champions like Rek'Sai or Lee Sin, where Hwei can easily block their engage and prevent them from getting on top of him, as well as them being melee champions that he can easily combo, that's when Hwei is most effective. And finally, Hwei is an incredibly strong laner. In the mid lane, he is strong at every single stage of the game. He's oppressive from level 1 and honestly has strong trades into all types of champions. That includes assassins, tanks, other control mages, etc. For bot lane though, he's really oppressive after about level 3. Once all your spells are online, you can begin going toe to toe with the enemy AD carry. Do make sure though that you wait till level 3 before you start playing the game, because enemy ADCs will outdamage you if you don't have your spells because their auto attacks simply do more damage. But for mid lane, he has long range and he can abuse people with his easy to hit spells and strong poking combos. Basically, Hwei is strong throughout almost the entire game, and unlike a lot of champions with spike on certain item points, Hwei is strong throughout the whole game, gets even stronger on certain item points, and is an absolute menace in the late game. The only time when you'll feel useless on Hwei is into those team comps that truly counter you. The last thing to note is that Hwei does struggle against assassins. Heavy dive comps are oppressive, of course, but there's nothing quite like an assassin such as Qiyana or Zed who one-shots you. All mages and ADCs in the game struggle with this, and you'll want to itemize differently or bring different summoner spells. We'll talk about that later on in the video. So, with the identity out of the way, let's talk about some of our pre-game choices on Hwei. First, let's go over the summoner spells. This is by far the easiest portion of the 3 summoner spells, runes, and items, and we'll get this out of the way really fast. First, always take flash. I won't beat around the bush here. Flash is the strongest summoner spell in the game, and it allows you to get out of the way of important enemy engages. Do note though that usually flashing when there's no objective or only to prevent one death for yourself is not worth it. We want to save our flash for important team fights, and the second most important point here is that if you were going to die, just don't flash. Just die anyways. It's one thing to die, but it's another thing to waste your flash and then die, leaving you vulnerable later on in the game for the enemy to kill you once again. For our second summoner spell slot, we have two options, Exhaust and Teleport. I'll quickly iterate why we won't take the other options here. Barrier, for instance, is worse than Exhaust because we're countered by Engage and Heavy Dive champs. Heavy Dive champs and Engage champs struggle against Exhaust more than they do Barrier. While Barrier is stronger in lane, we as mages tend to not interact so much in lane. We're very oppressive and we don't need that extra support. Ignite has a very short range and we often aren't in range of the enemy we're trying to kill to press it anyways, so that's out of the question. As for everything else, such as Ghost or Cleanse, I won't address these. They're pretty bad. If you have questions, you can leave it in the comment section below and I'm happy to respond, but they're so weak that I would never consider them unless Ghost becomes extremely broken like it was 2 years ago. We'll never be running these summoner spells. So, Exhaust or Teleport. Exhaust is better into Heavy Dive and Engage comps, but I'll be running Teleport in about 70% of games. In the games where I do run Exhaust, there will usually be a Rengar, a Jarvan, a Kiana, or a really fed enemy lethality champion on the enemy team. Someone that I'm trying to shut down. To this effect, I'm trying to take a summoner spell that removes the enemy's win condition, killing me. And if by taking Exhaust, I can assist in that purpose, then I'll usually take the summoner spell. But if they only have one assassin champion, so they only have one Rengar, only one Kiana, I can usually position accordingly, and I won't die to that one champion. I usually won't take Exhaust in these scenarios. It will take about 2 or 3 of those lethality or engaged champions for me to consider taking Exhaust. In the cases where I don't take Exhaust, I take Teleport. Teleport is incredibly strong. While it does have a long cooldown, it's incredibly good for lane, allowing you to teleport back to lane, so even if you die, you don't miss much CS, as well as create massive tempo advantages for you by killing the enemy, TPing back to lane, and denying them a wave by pushing really quickly. There are many use cases for Teleport. If you guys are interested about this, I'll address this in another video, but for now, those are the 3 primary summoner spells that you will run on Hwei. Now let's move on to the runes. There are 3 main rune pages that I run on Hwei. The first is my recommended Comet page. The reason for this is that it is the strongest rune inside of every single row you can possibly take. We run Comet, Manifold Band, Transcendence, Gathering Storm, with a secondary as Precision with Legend Haste, Cutdown. At the moment, these are the strongest runes. Cutdown is incredibly broken in our secondary page, and it's the reason why we'll always take Precision, as well as 15 ability haste from Legend Haste being incredibly strong. For our primary page, we run Mana Flow Band for mana, we run Comet because Deathfire Touch does on average about 600 damage less per game, as well as having a significantly lower win rate than Comet, with Transcendence being just all around a better rune than Absolute Focus, giving more gold stat efficiency, and Gathering Storm over Scorch, which we take because once again, Gathering Storm does have a higher win rate. And for stat shards, we run Ability Haste, Adaptive Force, and Flat Health. If you're wondering why Ability Haste and Flat Health, those are the 2 highest win rate runes in their respective pages. Flat Health performs significantly better than Scaling Health, and Ability Haste performs significantly better than Adaptive Force. I personally don't think that attack speed on mid lane mages is actually real. I see that many mid lane players run this, but I don't think 10% attack speed is worth circumventing 8 Ability Haste, which gives you 5% CDR at level 1. So with that said, consider this our default page, and then I have 2 other pages with some moderate changes to this one page. The first page that I'll run is the early game Comet page, which swaps Scorch for Gathering Storm. I run this page into early game focused lanes, such as Draven, Kalista, or in the mid lane you might be playing against a Kassadin that you want to poke out, or a lane where you just generally want to be aggressive to ensure that your jungler doesn't fall behind. Maybe you have a Graves or a Bel'Veth on your team. That's an excellent time to consider more early game choices for your rune page. So I will take Scorch instead of Gathering Storm for early trading power, as well as 2 Adaptive Force shards instead of my Ability Haste shard on the side. The reason for this is 2 Adaptive Force shards will allow me to deal more damage with each spell, allowing my poking to be significantly more oppressive, though Ability Haste does scale a little bit harder than the 9 AP that you would get from the Adaptive Force shard. And for our final rune page, I have the Aerie Melee Comp page. This is especially good into enemy melee team comps, where we'll swap Aerie for our Arcane Comet. The rest of the rune page will stay exactly the same as our default Comet page, and I'll only run this rune when the enemy team has significant melees, roughly 3 to 5 melee champions on the enemy team. The reason for this is that Aerie performs significantly better into melee enemy champions due to you being able to proc it more often. If you're looking for more information about the different runes, or you have questions about why I don't recommend other keystones such as Deathfire Touch, my rune guide will be linked to the description, which is 30 minutes of incredibly in-depth information on specifically mage runes, so check that out if you're interested. With the runes out of the way, let's talk about Hwei's item builds. For this section, we'll have 4 main core item builds, but before we talk about those, we first need to go over starting items and boots. For your starting items, always run Doran's Ring, 2 health potions, and Warding Totem, regardless of what rune you're playing in. The reason for this is that Doran's items these days are incredibly overtuned. You'll see people buying these in every single game, and there is no reason why you should be buying anything besides a Doran's item to start. They give you roughly 800 gold value, literally all of them, including Doran's Blade, Doran's Bow, Doran's Ring. All of them are incredibly strong. And for us, Doran's Ring is our Doran's option, and so we'll be taking that every single game. For our boot options, we'll be taking Sorcerer's Shoes or Ionian Boots. I typically run Sorcerer's Shoes because they provide me strong early game damage, though if I fall behind or the enemy team has significant magic resist, then I will build Ionian Boots. So treat Sorcerer's Shoes as your default unless you fall behind or the enemy team has that significant magic resist. For Ionian Boots, it's a great alternative to Sorcerer's Shoes, and the boots are very stat efficient, giving you incredibly high gold efficiency value. I almost always buy boots after my first item, but the only exception here is when I run the Enchanter build, which we'll talk about in a moment, where I will buy Lucidity Boots every single game after third item, so I'll never run Sorcerer's Shoes with that Enchanter build. Briefly, let's address the difference between raw Sorcerer's Shoes and raw Ionian Boots with their tier 3 upgrades. I want to start off by saying that the upgraded versions of both boots have relatively similar win rates to one another, but that doesn't mean that if you're playing mid-Hwei, that the scenarios under which you'll buy the boots don't change with the added effects that you get from the upgraded ones. For instance, the Ionian boot upgrades gives you movement speed, which might be more helpful for you against enemy teams which you need to kite. With that said, you don't need to kite ranged champions very much. They play from super far away, and so upgraded Ionian boots lose value against ranged team comps. The opposite is true for Sorcerer's Shoes. Sorcerer's Shoes, and their upgraded version, gains a lot of value against ranged team comps. You don't need movement speed, you need as much damage to one-shot them as possible, because ranged champions tend to be squishy. So, as a general rule of thumb, we do build Ionian Boots, including their upgrade, against tankier team comps, and we build the Sorcerer's Shoes, including their upgrade, against squishier team comps. Even though the upgraded Sorcerer's Shoes do give us 8% magic pen, we're still itemizing there into 18 magic penetration when we otherwise could have 20 ability haste, as well as the movement speed that would help us when fighting against a tankier team comp. Moving on from that, let's talk about our primary core builds. We have 4 of them. They are the primary BFT build, our scaling burn build, our full magic penetration build, and our Helia Diadem Enchanter. For the primary DFT build, we'll run Blackfire Torch into Cosmic Drive into Shadow Flame. This is our default build and will be the strongest choice for Hwei in about 70% of games. Blackfire Touch is the strongest early game mana item for almost all mages, and this obviously includes Hwei, who makes excellent use of the burn as he can hit multiple enemies at the same time. It has excellent stats, wave clear, damage, and of course provides you ability haste. An item like Luden's Echo, for instance, only provides you 10, whereas Blackfire Torch provides you 20. While you could swap Blackfire Torch for Seraphs into enemy engage, I typically prefer to run Exhaust if I really need the survivability versus buying what I believe to be an inferior item over Blackfire Torch. So I'll always swap my summoner spells before I'm willing to swap my build path. After Blackfire Torch, we itemize into Cosmic Drive. This gives us 7 seconds of movement speed from Torch's burn effect. And yes, Blackfire Torch and Liandry's do proc Cosmic Drive's movement speed bonus. It also provides some much needed early CDR, and so we get extremely low ability cooldowns very early into the game. For my typical third item with this page, I'll run Shadow Flame, which gives us more damage on third item than any other item. That includes Rabadons. I'll always build this second though against really squishy enemies, and then I'll delay my Cosmic Drive to being my third item. Against really tanky team comps, if you do run this BFT build, circumvent running the Shadow Flame entirely and instead opt in for a Void Staff or a Bloodletters in this slot. The reason for this is that Shadow Flame, much like Sorcerer's Shoes, gives us magic penetration, which is mostly a wasted stat against tanky champions, and so we'll skip it altogether. Our second page is the Scaling Burn page, and to be honest, I don't run this page anymore, but I know a lot of Hwei players who do, so I'll include it in this video. The page very quickly is Seraphs into Liandry's into Cosmic Drive. It gives you a lot of health. It's very similar to our primary BFT page, but instead of Blackfire Torch for burn, we have Liandry's, and then we'll buy that Seraph's Embrace. The difference here being you have no Shadow Flame, you still have your Cosmic Drive, and you have your Liandry's to proc it instead. You end up with a lot more health in this build, but you do have significantly less damage, and the trade-off that Seraphs takes longer to ramp up than Blackfire Torch inside of a game. If some of these items do get buffed, I would consider running this page again, but for now, I believe the primary BFT page should be stronger in almost all games. Before you ask, yes, Liandry's is strong against team comps that have a lot of max HP, but honestly, the item is 66% gold efficient, and so I would much rather itemize into a Void Staff after my primary BFT build, then run Liandry's Torment to try to kill tanks. Moving on from that page, we have our full Magic Pen page. This is something that I would strongly consider pivoting into if you begin a game with Blackfire Torch. For this build, we'll do Blackfire Torch into Shadow Flame into Storm Surge. This is your best page into 4 to 5 squishy enemy team champs. Ideally, all of those champions would be ranged, as this enables you to one-shot targets with 2 to 3 spells on 2 to 3 items. This is extremely strong, as you don't need your ultimate to kill any target at all. Always buy Sorcerer Shoes with this page after your first item. With that said, avoid this page at all costs against team comps where the enemy has any tanks whatsoever, as you will never be able to kill them. Typical 4th to 5th items for this page are always going to be Void Staff and Rabadons, as we're prioritizing damage over all else with this page. We don't care about CDR, we care about killing the opponent in 1 to 2 spells, because everyone in the game is squishy. It's one-shot them, or get one-shot first. And so to that effect, getting multiple spell rotations isn't important, as if you miss your spells, you're dead anyways. So let's just focus on doing as much damage as possible. And our final build page is the one that people find often to be the most interesting. In this page, we start with Tear of the Goddess, into Liandry's Torment, into Echoes of Helia, into Diadem of Songs. We buy that tier first so we can start stacking early, and it prevents us from going out of mana in lane. The downside here being that we spend 400 gold on 0 combat stats, making us pretty weak after our first reset. This is important, as if you trade equal with most other champions in the game, i.e. you hit 2 spells and they hit 2 spells, the enemy champion will usually come out on top. After Tear of the Goddess by Liandry's is our early game damage item, followed by Echoes of Helia into Diadem of Songs. The reason for this build order is as follows. Liandry's is our best damage item, and we need it to do constant damage and proc our Echoes of Helia healing. Echoes of Helia provides us better stats than Diadem, and so we'll buy this before we buy the Diadem. And then we'll buy the Diadem third for its interaction with Echoes of Helia. It exists just to dump the Helia healing every second. With this build, we do damage, which stores the damage in Echoes of Helia, and then every second, Diadem of Songs heals an ally, thereby dumping the Echoes of Helia healing on a 1-second cooldown. So it works as follows. Hit an enemy, store the damage in Echoes of Helia, Diadem heals your ally, dumping your stacks, and then you just continue to rinse and repeat, doing constant damage with your Liandry's and burn effects, storing it in Echoes, and then healing your enemy with Diadem of Songs. I only build this page in roughly 10% of games, and the conditions for that are as follows. Number 1, my team must have enough damage to carry without me, since I'm building Enchanter and I won't do that much damage. The fights must be long, which typically means that either side is low DPS and has tanks. The reason for it being long is you need a lot of time for your Echo Diadem to fully heal your team and to see a lot of value. The game must be excited to go late, or not late enough for you to hit these 3 items, as you're extremely weak on 1.5 to 2.5 items. Once you finish your 3rd item though, you are incredibly strong. The fight also can't be sloppy. The Enchanter build sucks if your team does it front to back, as your team won't be enraged for your Echo Diadem to actually heal them. And 5th, and the most important rule here, is the enemy team needs a character that you can farm damage off of. In a lot of games, this will be a tank, such as a Scion or Cassante, and the reason for this is obviously you convert damage to healing, and so you need a character which you can easily farm damage off of to constantly heal your allies. As I said, I only build this page in roughly 10% of games, and so if you are interested in building this page, make sure that you meet those conditions, otherwise you will be very, very worthless for your team. Typical 4th, 5th items here are Cosmic Drive, Uncrypt Bloom, or Bloodletters. This will maximize your CDR and also your utility inside of the fight, as you are playing Enchanter and you don't need to maximize damage with this build. Those were our 4 main core pages. Now we're going to talk about the items that we build after our first 3 items, and our choices are as follows. Rabadon's Deathcap, Shadow Flame, Banshee's Veil, Zonia's, Void Staff, Crypt Bloom, Bloodletters, and Morello's. Now, you might be wondering, Evan, why haven't you included any other items here? And the reason is, I don't build any other items besides these 8. The only other item that I would consider adding here is Horizon Focus, but I think there's better alternatives that give you better stats than an item such as Horizon. And so these are the only 8 that I'll build, and the only 8 that I'll be addressing. But if you have a question about another item, please leave it in the description, and I'm happy to answer. First, let's start by separating our items into 2 categories so you know how to build them. The first category is luxury items. We only build these items when we don't need the other items, i.e., these items are very greedy, they are a luxury. They don't serve a function for us to be able to play the game, and so we can be useful without them. Though it may be challenging, they aren't necessary items. In the second category, we have intentional items. They provide very specific functions. When you meet the conditions for the item, you must buy it immediately. For our intentional category, our items here are Morellonomicon, Bloodletters, Void Staff, and Crypt Bloom. The reason for those 3, Void Staff, Crypt Bloom, and Bloodletters being added is because they are Magic Pen items. If you don't buy Magic Pen items on time, the enemy will be literally unkillable. If the enemy team slots in a full Kaenic Rookern and maybe Merc Treads, you'll never be able to kill that target. and so you have to build pen immediately when you see the enemy start to slot in that magic resist. Note that magic resistance becomes gold efficient every game around 4th to 5th item due to base magic resistance values becoming high enough that the shred from these items becomes gold efficient. And in this situation, I would first buy an Oblivion Orb and then finish your Morellonomicon last item. It goes without saying that this is your anti-heal item, and you'll buy it into team comps that have 1 or 2 healers and fights are going along and their healing is starting to become a problem. So buy these intentional items right when you need them. When you find yourself with enough gold to start considering your next item and you look at the enemy team, realize you don't need one of those intentional items, that's when we start to explore the luxury page. In this section, we have Rabadon's Death Cap, which is our best high AP item to enter after the core build. It's a luxury item with extremely expensive components, but it is our best damage option if, of course, we don't have Shadow Flame. Shadow Flame is our burst option into squishy teams when you are even or ahead. It's incredibly gold efficient with an extremely strong passive, though some of our core builds do include Shadow Flame. Notably, our burn build with Seraphs, Leandries, and Cosmic doesn't, and so you could consider going Shadow Flame 4th or even 5th with those pages. And our last 2 items here are Banshee's Veil and Zhonya's. Banshees is an excellent defensive AP option when the enemy has a threatening skill shot. Examples include hooks such as Blitzcrank or Nautilus that can easily kill you in one shot, or Syndra E for instance, which might catch you out of position and enable the entire enemy team to follow up on you extremely quickly. For Zhonya's Hourglass, I build this item very sparingly into unavoidable team comps and heavy burst. So basically, I build this item into 90% Rengar and 10% when the enemy team has a Kiana or something like that who's absolutely smurfing, and I absolutely need Zhonya's to survive. Though to be honest, I mostly don't build Zhonya's until my 5th or 6th item, and it's rare that games get there anyways. My typical 3rd, 4th, and 5th items will look something like my core 3 items, followed by Rabadon's or Void Staff / Crypt Bloom / Bloodletters, and vice versa. So I'll buy my pen and my Rabadon's most of the time on 4th and 5th item in just about every game, and then my last item will be a choice between either Zhonya's or Banshee's Veil, or maybe I'll have had to buy anti-heal, depending on how effective the enemy team's healing is. Now let's get started with Hwei's abilities. Obviously, Hwei is the only mage in the entire game which has 3 options for each of his basic spells. This is incredibly important because it adds a new mechanic to mage gameplay, spell selection. That is to say, choosing the wrong spell in any situation can be the difference between massively outplaying the opponent and being completely worthless. So make sure you pay close attention on this, and let's get started. Hwei's first subject is Subject Disaster, which is his Q branch and serves as his damage spells. Our first spell here is Devastating Fire. Hwei launches a basic fireball, dealing damage to enemies at the end of its path. This ability does flat damage plus an additional max health % damage. That makes it naturally a little bit stronger against tanks. It's Hwei's primary poking spell, and it's very simple and easy to use inside of lane. In general, this is the highest damage of the 3 Q spells which you can choose on Hwei's kit. Note that this ability, unlike most of Hwei's abilities, does not have any special modifier. That is to say, it doesn't do any more or less damage against minions or monsters, but almost all of Hwei's other spells will have a modifier of some sort. Next, we have Hwei's QW, Severing Bolt. Severing Bolt launches a lightning bolt that does increased damage to immobilized or isolated enemies. This is an incredibly long-range basic spell, even longer than Xerath's Q. To my knowledge, it is the highest range damaging basic spell in the entire game. This spell is extremely strong for finishing enemies off, but will only do more damage than QQ if the enemy is extremely low. That's because the isolated and immobilized damage buff does bonus damage based on the enemy's missing health. With that said, this is probably Hwei's second most utilized poking spell, as it can be used even when the enemy is behind minions. Even though it does less damage than QQ, you might find yourself in a lane where the enemy is positioning properly, only able to hit them with QW, and so you'll be using this spell a little bit more. Our third spell in this branch is Hwei's QE, Molten Fissure. This is Hwei's bread and butter combo and wave clear spell. It creates a wake of lava on the ground, damaging and slowing enemies who walk within it. Note that Hwei's slowing does stack between spells, so if you QE, EE, or ult somebody, all 3 of those slows will stack on Hwei's kit. This is not the same for other champions. This spell will mostly be used whenever you're trying to poke the enemy and do damage to the wave at the same time, inside of lane at least. Inside of teamfights, this is Hwei's primary spell, as it is very effective at both controlling chokes and doing damage to enemies at the same time. While it does do less damage than QQ and QW, especially when enemies are low and QW is effective at executing those enemies, QE doesn't do so much less damage that we feel we're losing out on too much damage to make use of QE's utility utility in key circumstances where we would hit multiple enemies or be extending the fight even further with QE slow. So keep that in mind. We'll prioritize the utility on QE pretty significantly in a lot of situations. We'll also talk about QE a lot more when we get into the combo section later on, but I want to give you guys a basic understanding of how these abilities work and what you can expect to be using them for before we get into the nitty-gritty stuff. Also note that Hwei's QE does bonus damage when an enemy initially gets hit by it. It's not a very large amount, but it does have a small explosion when an enemy is first touched by the wave. Spell Shield will block that explosion, so QE can get rid of Edge of Night or Banshee's Veil. However, a Spell Shield will not get procced by the persistent lava damage from Hwei's QE. Hwei's W is Subject Serenity. This is Hwei's utility branch. Our first spell here is Fleeting Current. Hwei forms a current of water in the target direction, creating a path that gives him and allied champions bonus movement speed while inside of that path. Note that the bonus lasts 0.15 seconds while you remain in the area. So, because it has a short duration after you leave that area, 0.15 seconds, you can leave and walk slightly to the side before coming back in. This enables you to dodge spells inside of Fleeting Current as you move forward and approach the enemy. This is one of Hwei's strongest spells, and probably his most underutilized. Simply put, this spell forms a miniature Kled ultimate that is extremely strong when you're engaging or disengaging with the rest of your team. Its use case cannot be underrated, and it's the spell I find myself using the second most often in this branch inside of combat. Also note that Hwei can move during Fleeting Current's cast time. So if an enemy is running towards you and you're trying to run away from them, Fleeting Current will never be the reason why they catch you. Most other spells inside of League do have a cast time, and so casting those spells will stun you for a short duration, allowing the enemy to catch up to you. Next, we have our double W, Pool of Reflection. Hwei summons a pool of water, which essentially just gives himself and allied champions a shield inside of the zone. Note that the shield refreshes and gets stronger over the course of 3 seconds. This shield is 85% effective for allies, so it's slightly less strong on Hwei's allies as it is on himself. However, because it's only a 15% decrease, I would never really seriously consider the fact that it's weaker on your allies in the situations under which you'll be using this spell. It's such a small nerf to using it that it's not really important when considering who to shield with your double W. This spell is incredibly strong, having a 30% AP ratio on the initial shield, getting all the way up to a 60% AP ratio at the end of the shield. This is an incredibly strong shield, on par with Lux's W, and it cannot be understated how effective using this spell is inside of combat, especially when trying to save low HP allies. When fighting around level 3 to level 4, this is by far Hwei's strongest spell, as it does around 120 shielding at those early levels. It can also be used on your entire team, and 120 shield on your entire team at level 3 is disgusting, and will immediately win you the Scuttle Crab fight if you find yourself using this under the proper conditions. Make sure though that when you use the spell, you use it early and you use it often. That means when the fight starts, you throw down your double W, trying to target as many allies as possible inside of the zone. This gives it ample time to ramp up for those 3 seconds, giving your allies the use of the full and entire shield. However, when you do use it, make sure that your allies won't immediately move outside, as they won't receive the benefit from this ability. Our next spell is Stirring Lights. Hwei surrounds himself with 3 flares that empower his next 3 basic attacks or abilities for 9 seconds to deal magic damage and restore mana. This damage is reduced to 50% against minions, so it's not super effective for wave clear, but it is effective at restoring mana and doing that slight amount of magic damage. Inside of lane, you'll frequently see me spamming the spell nearly off cooldown. That's to restore mana and make sure I have enough resources to continuously poke the enemy out of the lane. This is Hwei's weakest in combat spell though, as it doesn't do too much damage, only a 15% AP ratio 3 times, so 45% AP ratio, and when compared with Hwei's double W, it is significantly weaker. Do note though that Hwei's WE can be used for 1 passive proc per target, so if you EE-WE, that will enable you to get 1 passive explosion. However, Hwei's WE cannot be used to give you 2 passive procs for target. So if you QQ, WE, auto, and then auto again, that will not give you 2 passive procs for your 1 WE. The general rule of thumb for Hwei is 1 spell equals 1 passive proc per target. It is the same no matter what, whether it's WE or your ultimate. A spell that provides multiple instances of damage cannot provide you 2 passive procs on 1 target. To summarize for Subject Serenity, Hwei's WQ is the best when engaging or disengaging fights, Hwei's double W is the best when you're inside of fights, and Hwei's WE is the best for out of combat utility and otherwise getting a little bit more damage when you otherwise wouldn't have been able to kill the enemy with just your other 3 spells. Next we have Hwei's E, Subject Torment. This is Hwei's crowd control branch, and as so, it's incredibly important that we understand the use cases for specifically these 3 spells, as using the wrong spell in the wrong situation will almost always kill you. Starting with Hwei's EQ, Grim Visage. Hwei launches a face, which is a projectile, in the target direction that does magic damage, and then fears and knocks down the enemy that it hits. It also slows them by 70% to 99%, depending on the distance from Hwei. Note once again that the slow does stack multiplicatively with other slows from Hwei's spells. There's a couple of interesting things about this EQ. 1. Hwei's EQ does not go through minions. This is incredibly important, as if you're inside of a minion wave trying to trade with the enemy, you will not be able to EQ them if they do dash at you. 2. Hwei's EQ does slow them as it fears, so if an enemy has slow resistance, such as Storm Raider Surge, or Master Yi's ultimate, or even Swiftness Boots, they will run away from you inside of the fear at a faster rate than they otherwise would have. Third, fears and charms do end if the target that feared or charms you dies while you are crowd controlled. So, if a Seraphine ults you and dies after ulting, that charm will go away. The same thing is true with Hwei's EQ. If you EQ someone and die, that fear will no longer be active on them. So if you know you're going to die and you're trying to make space for your teammates, use EW instead of EQ. This spell is most effective against enemies that have a dash engage spell, such as Rek'Sai or Lee Sin Q, as you can use the fear to knock them back and interrupt their dash, preventing them from getting damage onto you and enabling you to stay safe in otherwise tumultuous situations for other mages. This is Hwei's bread and butter and most important CC spell. Our next spell in this branch is Gaze of the Abyss, Hwei's EW. Hwei tosses an eyeball to a location. After roughly 0.7 seconds, it can lock on to the nearest enemy champion, creating a projectile that will root the target. This root does heavily scale with the amount of points you have in Hwei's E, going from 1.2 to 2 seconds all the way at max rank. Note that there are 2 projectiles here. One is when Hwei throws his EW, and the second one is the projectile that the EW creates to latch onto the enemy. This means that both of those projectiles can be blocked by Yasuo Windwall, Samira, or Braum, for instance. It also means that the rooting projectile can be blocked by minions and other champions, even if it wasn't what Hwei's EW latched onto. Note that Hwei's EW cannot lock onto monsters or minions, it can only lock on to enemy champions. When it does lock onto an enemy champion, it will root them for that duration, as well as revealing them for 2.5 seconds, which is especially effective against champions such as Akali. One final thing to note about the spell is if an enemy does flash or use a dash while that projectile is latching onto them, they will only dodge that projectile if they dash super far away, as Hwei's EW does have a tracking range. It is a heat-seeking missile, but it only travels a certain amount of units away from where that eyeball was created. And finally for this branch, we have Hwei's EE, Crushing Maw. Hwei conjures a jaw at a target location that snaps after 0.6 seconds, bringing enemies into the middle, slowing them, and dealing damage. This is Hwei's bread and butter combo spell, as an EEQQ or EEQW is nearly undodgeable for an enemy that doesn't have a mobility spell. Note once again that these slows from Crushing Maw do stack multiplicatively with the slows that were applied by your other spells as Hwei. This is Hwei's most used spell inside of this branch. It's Hwei's bread and butter for poking inside of lane and setting up all of his combos. The other 2 spells inside of this branch have niche use cases when the enemy is trying to engage on you. This spell is your primary offensive spell in this branch and should be used by far the most frequently. Essentially, this spell is just a set EE at a target location, and we all know how strong set EE can be inside of a team fight and how oppressive it can feel to play against this. Well, Hwei has that spell, but at a target location, making it even stronger and setting up you and all of your allies to hit your spells with relative ease. Do note though that after you use Crushing Maw, you should never move your cursor if you plan on using another spell. This is because the enemy will be dragged to your cursor's location if they do get hit by the EE, and as such, you don't need to move your cursor to hit your follow-up spells. And finally, Hwei does have a spell called Wash Brush, where if you use your Q, your W, or your E, and decide you don't want to use one of the follow-up spells, you can just press R in order to toggle off and not use a basic spell. Moving on now, let's talk about Hwei's passive, Signature of the Visionary. When Hwei damages a champion with an ability, he marks them, and damaging them with a second ability will consume the mark, creating an explosion beneath them. This explosion can damage multiple enemies, as it is in a radius. However, if you do hit an enemy with 2 spells, they can flash or move out of the detonation beneath them. So it's very important that you don't expect the detonation to hit, and you always follow up on those low HP enemies instead of relying on your passive to be the last instance of damage. Note that the ability that consumes the mark cannot apply it on the same cast instance. This is very complicated, but if you consume a mark on a target, it will not then create another mark on that same target. So if your ultimate was the spell that detonated the mark, it will not also be the spell that creates the first damaging ability for that next mark. A damaging spell can't create 2 marks on any target, in other words. So that means if you WE and auto a target twice, that will not create 2 marks on them. Enemies can be damaged by multiple explosions at once, so if you EEQQ a target, both targets will take damage from both explosions. Spell Shield can block the mark, both its consumption as well as its detonation, and the indicator for the effect is actually significantly smaller than the radius it actually hits. So, Hwei's passive circle on the ground has about a 200 unit extra radius around it under which champions will take damage. So they have to move incredibly far in order to not be hit by Hwei's passive. And finally, we have Hwei's ultimate, which is actually one of the weaker ultimates inside of the game. It's called Spiraling Despair. Hwei essentially launches a projectile that latches onto the first target hit, slowing, dealing damage, and growing over the course of a couple of seconds until ultimately it explodes, dealing a big chunk of damage to all enemies in the radius. This ultimate applies passive stacks to anybody who gets hit. The slow does once again stack multiplicatively with the slows from other Hwei spells, and the slow ramps up over the course of the spell. So if a target does use something like Garen Q in the middle of your ultimate slow stack, it will remove all of the stacking slows that have been created up until that point. There are some important things to note about this spell before we get into the combo section, which will include Hwei's ultimate quite extensively, the first of which being that Hwei's ultimate has a very slow projectile speed. While you might not have noticed it explicitly, you've probably realized in League that certain spells move slower or faster than other spells. Hwei's ultimate is a very slow spell, and I'll very rarely use Hwei's ultimate if the enemy is not crowd controlled, as it's incredibly easy to dodge. While it does have a long range, its cast time is 0.25 seconds, which is around the average human reaction speed, and the speed is only 1400. To put this into perspective, Hwei's QQ has a speed of 2000, making it incredibly hard to dodge as it's about 1/3 faster than Hwei's ultimate. I won't spend too much time talking about the ultimate as it's incredibly important to those combos, so without further ado, let's get into the combos section for Hwei. Before we go into the combos, you'll notice that I haven't added WE into any of them. That's because WE can be added to almost any Hwei combo to do more damage, and W is not a one-size-fits-all spell. The W spell that you'll want to use does not depend on the combo that you're doing, but rather the situation you find yourself in. Maybe you use WQ to engage the fight. That doesn't mean your combo suddenly becomes useless because you can't add WE's 45 damage on top of it. So just note that WE won't be included on those individual combos, but you can add it to any combo in this list to do more damage. For this section, we're going to separate the combos into 3 unique groups. The first group is going to be our fun combos that are a little bit wacky, but not the most useful. Our second group will be our primary use combos that will typically consist of 2 basic spells. And our third group will be the full, all-in, burst the enemy combos that will contain all of the spells that you'll want to use in order after level 6. Let's start with our flash combos. There are 3 spells after which Hwei can use his ult during the cast animation. The first is the ultimate, the second is our QQ, and the third is our EQ. To do this, press a spell and then flash to the target location, and the spell will go off at Hwei's flash destination. These combos are especially good at catching enemies off guard, and the most used combo in this section is going to be our flash. Note that you do actually flash and press the button first. So you don't flash QQ, you QQ flash. So long as you flash right after you start the spell animation, you will perform the combo correctly. Now, of these 3 combos, I very rarely use EQ Flash, but I do use R Flash and QQ Flash fairly often. Let's break it down. R Flash is very good when you're following up on some allied combo. It's the easiest way to get in there from very long range and follow up on allied CC if you otherwise wouldn't be able to outside of using your QW from max range. QQ Flash is only good if you're trying to finish off an enemy that's on low HP and QQ into their range and kill them if you don't have your other spells up. Though most of the time, if you are going to QQ Flash, you could just QW them from max range anyways. And finally, EQ Flash is only good for 2 reasons. 1, if every other spell is off cooldown and it's the only thing you can do and an enemy is running away from you. And second, if you're absolutely smurfing and you can catch an enemy off guard by EQ flashing into their face so it's undodgeable and then full comboing them before running away. I find these combos to be incredibly fun, especially R Flash is something that you can integrate a lot into your games. However, they are not the most practical combos, and I'll only use these combos in around 1 of every 4 games that I play. For our second group of combos, we have our basic spell combos. The first in this category is going to be our QEEE. This is our bread and butter combo when we're looking to damage the wave as well as do damage to the enemy at the same exact time. To do this combo, QE first, then use your EE to drag the enemy into the QE explosion. A lot of the times you'll be QEing just to push the wave, and then you'll notice that the enemy has overextended, going for an EE afterwards. In light of this, sometimes you won't do this combo intentionally, but always know that when you're QEing, you have the opportunity to EE the enemy into the spell for some added damage. Both spells will proc your passive, and the slows will stack off of both of them. This is best when you're in lane or when you're inside of a team fight, as you can pull enemies together inside of a choke to get massive passive procs on all of them at the same time. Our second combo here is the EW-QW. You will use EW as a zoning spell or a follow-up root on allied CC. Once you see the EW has landed, the enemy has been rooted, you can QW the enemy from far away for some incredibly safe and long-range damage. Don't force this combo by itself though, only use your EW if it catches somebody under tower, or as I said, following up on allied CC. Typically, EE is a better setup spell, but sometimes you'll notice that your EW will latch onto the enemy, and this is an excellent time to follow up with the guaranteed QW. Third, we have EEQW, which is just a slight variation of the combo we just listed. This is an incredibly common lane poke pattern, especially when the target is behind minions or extremely low HP. EE will pull them into a predictable spot, and then you can QW right on top of your cursor to always hit your QW unless the enemy has incredibly high movement speed or a dash. Now, this won't guarantee that QW will do isolated or immobilized damage, as the target isn't immobilized from EE, but it will usually guarantee the QW landing, and it's an incredibly safe and practical poke pattern. Of course, we would love to EEQQ, our next combo, in most conditions, but sometimes we don't have that luxury and we'll use EEQW. And of course, that brings us to our EEQQ combo. This is our bread and butter combo. We want to use this in almost every single situation when we can. We'll swap out QE if we're trying to push the wave or control a choke, or QW if the enemy's behind minions or low HP. But in general, EEQQ is a strong default and a good choice combo for new players that are learning to play Hwei and want to keep the combos simple. And now let's bring everything all together and go over our more advanced combos. The first in this list is the EERQQ. This is the same as the combo we just talked about, except we're adding R in front of our QQ. Use EE to catch an enemy or multiple enemies together, use ultimate without moving your cursor at all, and then use QQ directly on top of it. EE will guarantee that the rest of your spells hit, and R and QQ will do maximum follow-up damage. This is an incredibly strong combo if you can get multiple enemies and multiple passive procs all at once, because your damage will go off near instantly with the QQ, and you can explode enemies incredibly fast. Note that you could theoretically do EEQQR, and the orders of the spell in this combo aren't particularly important. Our next combo in this section is EERQW. Use your EE and follow up with your ultimate, wait a little bit, and then use QW after the ultimate damage has gone off. We want to wait until the ultimate damage has gone off for two reasons. One, your ultimate can kill minions around it, giving your QW that isolated damage. And second, your ultimate will bring the enemy's HP lower, increasing the execute damage that your QW will deal. This is an excellent combo against low HP enemies, and you can often substitute the QW for the QQ, as I said previously, but this combo is extremely effective from long range, and if when you start the combo, your QQ is on cooldown, this is an excellent time to do this combo, as you can substitute the QW in, and your ultimate lasts for 3 seconds, so you can use your QW at the end 3 seconds later than you otherwise would have used your QQ. Next, we have our EWRQW. This is the same as the EW-QW combo with the ultimate added. We let the EW root them first, we press our ultimate, we wait for the ult to explode, and then we use the QW bolt. This is incredibly strong when someone gets caught by EW, and we want to follow up with maximum damage. This is not the best combo when we want to hit multiple targets, as EW is single target, and QW has a shorter AoE radius than QE or QQ. However, this combo is incredibly strong when following up on allied CC, and I would recommend that you use this combo relatively sparingly. And for our final combo in this section, we have the kill them and get out combo. This is the EQRWQ-QW combo. I use this combo when a fight gets incredibly dangerous and you need to finish someone while escaping. EQ will buy you space, your R will let you maximize damage and slow the enemy from getting on top of you, WQ to run away from them, and QW to fire at max range while you keep on running away from the enemy. Prioritize using WQ here always instead of WE, because WE will give you a little bit of damage increase, while WQ can be the difference between you living and dying in a risky situation. Now, before we get into the meat and potatoes with the rest of the guide, I want to let you guys know that I do have a Hwei website. It'll be linked in the description below, and it costs $1.60 a month to access. It contains all of the matchups for Hwei and all of the most up-to-date information, including some things that weren't included in this video. For one reason or another, they were too complicated, too convoluted, or things that a general YouTube audience wouldn't find interesting. To be honest, this is kind of a steal. Most people sell their matchup guides for around $15 a month, and for only $1.60 a month at the time of recording, you can access this website. Link to that is in the description. Now, onto our gameplay sections. Now, we just finished everything for all of our pre-game shenanigans, and finally we can talk about all of the gameplay. Starting with the laning in early game, we're going to segment this into two sections: how to play Hwei in bot lane and how to play Hwei in mid lane. There will be a fair amount of information that is relevant for both sides though, and I'll try to keep it very descriptive about which role I'm talking about. Let's begin with playing the bot lane in the early game. At the start of every game for bot lane, path immediately to the middle brush and drop a ward. This will prevent opponents from being able to bush cheese you level 1 and generally keep you a little safer as you look to CS the next couple of waves safely. At level 1, you almost always want to start Q. The only exception for this is when you find yourself in a bad situation and you need to start E in order to disengage the fight extremely early. At this point, we're almost always going to give priority. This means stand back, let the enemy push into you, and just CS from a distance. Especially against ADCs that take lethal tempo, we are significantly weaker than them. Once we hit level 2 to 3 and are no longer at a level disadvantage, we can look to take some harder trades. After all, mages rely on spells, and without all of our spells, we are a tad bit weaker than ADCs. It's also worth noting that most ADC kits have most of their power budget in 1 or 2 spells. Think of Draven, whose Q is a massive steroid boost, but his W and E aren't that strong. The same thing could be said for Ezreal, whose Q is incredibly powerful, but respectively his W and E don't do all that much damage. For us though, all 3 of our spells are incredibly important and have very distinct functions. We need them before we're able to fully play the game. For this stage of the game though, make sure you don't give up CS and XP for no reason. Sometimes a champion like Nautilus, for instance, might be able to zone you off the wave entirely. The most important part here is that you reach level 3 to 4 with enough mana, health, and experience to contest the lane going forward. For mid lane on the other hand, levels 1 to 3 is one of your strongest points in the game. Hwei can skill E level 1 into melee matchups for some easy trading plus slow, which can enable Hwei to chain together more auto attacks and punish mid laners who try to go up for CS and melee range. Against ranged champions, you want to take Q most of the time. The reason for this is Q has a longer range, it has a shorter cooldown, and it does more damage. Typically, if you trade Hwei Q for another mage's spell, you'll be winning if both of you connect. Key to this part of the lane for mid lane is ensuring that you're constantly autoing the wave, never giving up prio, and that you're contesting the level 2 first. You're strong throughout all portions of the game as Hwei mid, and you want to always be looking for your poking spells off cooldown. Do note that many mages have spells that go through minion waves, think Syndra Q or Orianna Q, and if they posture behind their minion wave and hit their spell, sometimes you won't be able to react. Make sure that you position around the minion wave effectively so you can always find an angle if they choose to trade with you. Next, we'll talk about the level 4 to 10 range. In bot lane, this part of the lane depends heavily on your matchup. Once again, you can check out my Hwei website in the description, which has all of the matchup information. Generally speaking, Hwei is decently strong in this window, but loses all-in and extended trades against ADCs. If you're against one of those lanes where the enemy ADC is incredibly strong, just continue to scale. Champions like Misfortune, Corki, Draven, or Kalista win the game if you attempt to fight them early. In these situations, just don't. Wait until you're later on in the game when we can take full advantage of our strong teamfighting potential. Key to this stage is ensuring that you can assist your jungler with securing scuttle crabs or pinging your jungler to leave crab if you cannot contest. The most important thing you can do during this part of the lane is to not die. Once Hwei reaches level 6 in the bot lane, he is incredibly strong and your time is coming. Starting around level 6 to 7, you have everything that you need to succeed. You have points in all of your spells, you have several points in your Q, and a mana item that will prevent you from going out of mana unless you are spamming excessively. We play from our range and we poke until the enemy is at around 50 to 70% HP. After that, we can simply 1v1 them, even if we're tanking autos from the enemy. Just make sure that you hit your spells using a proper EE into QQ combo so you can connect successfully. The only way that we can lose is if the enemy flashes our combo or we somehow miss our EE. In higher elos, this will mostly be a 1v1 lane, and Hwei is incredibly strong at this point. In lower elos, however, these lanes are slightly more losable as they become a 2v2, and if the enemy support CCs you and manages to connect, you can lose the fights. In this case, always make sure that you have a plan. If the enemy support gets on top of you, you must hit the enemy ADC. Killing an enemy support does not end the fight, as the enemy ADC can continue to do damage, but killing the enemy ADC ends the fight, as the support is relatively worthless without its corresponding ADC. Some supports are an exception, such as Senna and Bard, but it's a good general rule of thumb. With that said, to recap, levels 1 to 3 for bot lane, you're pretty weak. 4 to 6, it depends on the matchup, but you can mostly look for poke, and then sometimes look for an all-in. And after that level 6 mark, you're incredibly strong and can fight almost every single bot laner without much trouble. In mid lane, as we mentioned, you're incredibly strong from levels 1 to 3, and it only gets better. At around level 6, Hwei can one-shot a target after landing 1 or 2 poke spells ahead of time. This makes him an incredibly oppressive laner, and he does slightly more damage than other control mages such as Orianna or Syndra. With that said, he does have one major downfall, as he doesn't have as much range as other champions. Champions such as Syndra or Xerath can abuse you from further than Hwei can, so you'll find yourself in those lanes outranged. One thing you can do in lanes where the enemy is incredibly passive or you're being outranged is use your WQ to get in range, take a quick EEQQ trade, and then rapidly disengage. If you haven't realized by now, the bread and butter for Hwei is short, powerful combo trades, and then backing off once your spells are off cooldown. If you are struggling in lanes, for instance a Katarina or a Sylas, Hwei has incredibly effective wave clear. Especially inside the mid lane, you can always delete waves and then look to play with your jungler. Though there is no guarantee that a champion like Sylas or Katarina will be weak inside of the skirmish, it will then boil down to whether or not you are better at Hwei or they are better at Sylas or Katarina than you. So with that said, it becomes less about laning and more about whether or not you can manage to be effective inside of the skirmishes, and we're going to talk more about that in our mid game section. We'll talk about how we can play our team fights. Now, going into the mid-game section, I want to say that I'm going to try my best to keep this simple. I watched a lot of guides on mages around the internet, and many of them are way too convoluted to follow. They tell you ephemeral things such as control a choke. And I'm going to try my best to keep this practical so that you guys know how to implement things as Hwei. The first thing in the mid-game is that lanes will swap. Your bot laners will be mid, and your mid and top laners will be in side waves. We need to make an assessment about the champions that we're playing against. So, we need to identify our lane opponent. We need to know who we're playing against, their kit, and how they can trade. For instance, a Syndra is much scarier due to her CC than a Jace. You need to learn to play these matchups by ear. That will come with a lot of Hwei games, but a general rule of thumb is as follows. An enemy top laner is incredibly scary, and they can usually kill you in the blink of an eye. Think of Renekton pressing flash and then one-shotting you in one combo, where enemy mid laners, especially ones that don't have CC, are extremely easy matchups for us. We have incredibly good wave clear, and we can usually abuse them as they attempt to CS under tower. I won't go into much side lane macro specifics, but just note that that is generally how things work. The enemy top laner tends to be the strongest person at this point in the game due to their role getting more gold and XP. To keep ourselves safe as we lane in either the mid or side waves, depending on what role we started with, we need to learn how to use our blue trinket. At this point, you should have a blue trinket, of course, and you should be using that to spot enemies through a corridor. With the addition of Fey lights, you can usually use your blue trinket on a Fey light to farm your wave safely. Ensure that in a nearby wall, an enemy such as a Fiddlesticks or Raul Leona, anybody generally who has long range engage, won't be looking to kill you the moment that you go to CS. I'm definitely no expert on warding. The only advice I have for you here is ward when you walk up to the wave, and if you don't have a ward, well, then be careful. I average a 12 vision score every single game, and I kind of think warding is fake, so we're going to move past this one. Let's dive a little bit more into how we can read the enemy laner. We need to think, have they finished their first item? Are they fed? Are they a champion who spikes at this point in the game? You'll learn these skills as you play more Hwei and League in general, but you always need to be thinking of your opponent's strength. Against lane matchups where we can trade aggressively, we want to poke, back off, and repeat. Against matchups where we're against unfamiliar opponents and we're not sure if they have flash, or we might generally be unsafe, a good rule of thumb is to always keep your E off cooldown, only looking for QQ trades and saving your WQ and EQ as disengage tools. The strength of any mage, and that includes Hwei, is our range. Poke and clear waves from a distance, and before an enemy can gap close, we use the right defensive ability so that we can leave. Now, for some mid-wave specifics, you should always be hitting mid-waves as they crash. A general rule of thumb is hit the mid-wave and then look for something else. Whether it's a dragon that's spawning, a control ward you need to clear, or vision that you must contest before the objective spawns, you always need to clear the mid-wave. Try to connect with your support and then walk up to the mid-wave before everything happens. Some champions, such as Nocturne or Jarvan, can easily catch you out if you're exposed on the mid-wave by yourself. Obviously, connecting with your support will keep you a lot safer. Some supports won't listen to you, and they'll go off doing their own thing. Under these conditions, wait for the enemy to push the wave first. Sit back, clear your wave yourself, and then look to play on the map. It's a sad reality of solo queue that you can't control everything, and instead of getting bent out of shape, we need to accept that variables are out of our control and always look to do the best thing. The number one thing we need to be concerned with, though, is never dying. Our supports and teammates in general will do what they will, but we need to keep ourselves safe. As the carries of a fight, it's our responsibility to make sure that we show up to every skirmish around the map and that we're in tip-top condition to be fighting them. Now, let's talk a little bit more about Hwei's positioning in teamfighting now that you have a better grasp about how to play those wave states. Hwei, as I said before, is a mage, and as such, we need to find ourselves always positioned behind our teammates. This might mean that you need to reposition with flash or teleport, as being solo and on a flank is generally speaking a really bad idea. We stay behind our teammates, and then we control chokes. We spam QEs when the enemy engages, EWs in corridors where the enemy might be moving, and QWs from super duper far away. And that's before the fight even starts. We are trying to control the enemy's movement. When a fight starts as Hwei, we want to be as far away from the enemy engage as possible, but close enough to hit targets while our team is fighting them. That means we're very rarely in range of the enemy backline, and instead we'll just be hitting frontline and keeping ourselves safe. The goal here is to survive the entire fight and kill as many enemies as possible. Naturally, we have a higher priority on targets that are worth something. For instance, killing a Sejuani doesn't provide our team much. She's a tank and she's not all that threatening, but killing the enemy Zahin, that might be worth significantly more. Make a threat assessment about characters before you start the fight and know who the priority targets are. As Hwei, once that fight breaks out, try to use zone control. QE into EE will be your best friends here, as well as EW inside of those corridors to control enemy movements. Once the enemy starts moving into you, make sure that you have your WQ off cooldowns that you can kite backwards. From this point, it's about recognizing the combos that you want to use in any given situation. QEEER can be a great combo if many enemies are clumped together and you need the QE for the added slow. EEQQR can be an excellent combo if you're trying to maximize damage and kill a target quickly. And generally speaking, using EW plus a QW combo can help follow up on enemy CC, even on an enemy target that's all the way across the fight from you. Hwei has excellent resources and target access inside of teamfights, and if you fully understand Hwei's kit, you can play under almost any conditions, including relatively terrible ones that other mages would really struggle inside of. I'll summarize what I said into 3 main points. Number 1, stay in the back of a fight. Your front line is your shield, you let them absorb all the damage, and you spam your spells as they're tanking. Number 2, make sure that you watch those flanks and you use your EW and QE to control the movements of enemies. If an enemy Qiyana gets on you from the side, you're dead no matter what, and your team probably isn't paying attention, let's be honest. And third, prioritize targets. Know who it matters if you hit them, and don't waste your spells on targets that are otherwise irrelevant. Sometimes it's even better to keep your spells off cooldown than to hit the nearest target if they're truly worthless. And finally, let's get into the late game section. At this point in the game, most of the towers are gone from the map, death timers are incredibly high, and one fight can decide the entire game. Your job is never to die. You don't walk forward, you don't walk through fog of war, and you ensure that you are always ready to follow up on your teammates' plays. Things can happen in solo queue. An enemy might be where they otherwise shouldn't, or your ally can die randomly on a side wave. You should never be alone. Make sure that if your team does die, you're ready to clear waves and win the fight for them. You can always sit there and complain about your teammates' actions, but that's not productive. Instead, focus on clearing those mid waves, staying safe, and showing up to every single fight. Note that games do last longer in lower elos, which is actually a good thing for Hwei as he scales incredibly hard. Towards Challenger, games only last around 26.5 minutes, and in Iron, games last around 30.5 minutes. Now, in this late game section, teamfighting has exactly the same rules. We need to make sure that we're behind our teammates and that we control those chokes. But teamfighting is way more severe. There are bigger stakes. Tanky champions are nearly unkillable, while mages, anyone who can dive on you, and marksmen do crazy amounts of damage to each other. If you were staying safe before, make sure that you're staying extra safe now and that you're not in range of any target who can easily one-shot you. If they could kill you in 3 spells before, they can kill you in 1.5 now. That's just how the late game works. So always have good priority targeting and awareness of where the enemies are. To that effect, I have a list of things that you should never do in side lane. Never find yourself alone in side lane when all 5 of the enemies are uncounted on the map. Don't force a fight on Baron and Dragon if you're outscaled or down in resources. Generally speaking, if all 10 players are up and one team starts Baron, that's the team that will lose the fight. Never spend your E before an enemy has dove on you or otherwise the enemy has uncommitted resources. Don't leave your team alone, they'll always die instantly, so try your best to push those mid waves and then move to them immediately. And do not, whatever you do, use WE for extra damage when a double W shield or a WQ repositioning in that utility would have otherwise made that fight incredibly more playable. always prioritize utility in the late game because damage numbers are so high anyways that everyone's getting overkilled and that extra damage from WE didn't really matter anymore. Now, I want to thank you guys very much for watching. If you're curious for any resources, you can check out my APC guide in the description below, as well as my Mage Rune guide, which will help you guys understand a little bit more about how I arrived at the conclusions I did for this video and why I play Hwei the way that I do. Outside of that, I do also have a website which teaches people how to play Hwei and is always updated with the most recent information. That website at the time of recording this does cost $1.60 a month, but it has absolutely all of the matchups for every single champion. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.